The morning they announced my promotion to Admiral, I was 32 years old, standing in a windowless briefing room 3 floors beneath the Pentagon, wearing civilian clothes that cost less than my father's dress shoes. Nobody took my picture. There was no applause, no family in the gallery, no ceremonial sword. Just a manila folder sliding across a scratched metal table and a voice saying, "Congratulations, Admiral Martinez. Your country thanks you for your service." The irony wasn't lost on me. 24 hours earlier, my own family had forbidden me from attending my brother's promotion ceremony because they said I was an embarrassment to the Martinez name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The salt air carried the sound of gulls and distant ship horns as I drove through the gates of Naval Station Pearl Harbor for the first time in 7 years. My hands remained steady on the steering wheel, muscle memory from years of high-stakes operations where a tremor could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The security guard barely glanced at my visitor's pass before waving me through, unaware that the woman in the Honda Civic had once held a security clearance so high it didn't appear on any official documentation. Danny's promotion ceremony was scheduled for 1400 hours in the base's main ceremonial hall. Lieutenant Daniel Martinez was finally getting his promotion to lieutenant commander, following in our father's footsteps with military precision. Captain Robert Martinez had spent the last 3 decades building a reputation as one of the Navy's most decorated surface warfare officers, and Danny was his pride and joy, the son who colored inside the lines and never questioned orders. I parked in the visitor's lot and sat for a moment, watching families stream toward the ceremony hall. Children in pressed clothes walked beside mothers adjusting fathers' ribbons, everyone playing their part in the grand theater of military tradition. I wasn't supposed to be here. The phone call from Elena, my mother, had been crystal clear 3 days ago. "Jessica, honey, I think it's better if you don't come to Danny's ceremony. Your father feels it might create unnecessary tension, and this is Danny's day." Unnecessary tension. That was their diplomatic way of saying they were ashamed of me, still convinced I had cracked under pressure 7 years ago aboard the USS Phoenix. Still believing the official story that Lieutenant Jessica Martinez had suffered a psychological breakdown during a routine training exercise and been quietly discharged for the good of all involved. They had no idea that the frightened, broken daughter they remembered no longer existed, if she ever had. The woman who stepped out of that Honda Civic had spent the last 7 years becoming someone entirely different, someone who operated in the spaces between official channels, who solved problems that didn't officially exist, who prevented disasters that would never make headlines because they never happened. My work with Naval Intelligence Special Operations had taken me from the back alleys of Seoul to the boardrooms of defense contractors, always moving in the shadows, always undercover, always invisible. But today wasn't about work. Today was about family. And the weight of 7 years of silence was finally becoming unbearable. I made my way through the base, past the familiar sights of my childhood. This place had been my playground once, when Dad was stationed here and we lived in base housing. I knew every shortcut, every building, every corner where enlisted personnel gathered to smoke and complain about officers. The ceremonial hall loomed ahead, an imposing structure that had witnessed thousands of promotions, retirements, and changes of command over the decades. Inside, the hall buzzed with pre-ceremony energy. Families claimed their seats while uniformed personnel checked last-minute details. I spotted my parents immediately in the 3rd row, Mom in her navy blue dress and pearls, Dad in his dress whites with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished career. They looked older than I remembered, more worn around the edges, but still maintaining the perfect military bearing that had defined their marriage. Danny stood near the front with his fellow promotees, tall and confident in his dress uniform. At 28, he had inherited Dad's strong jaw and Mom's dark eyes, along with an unwavering belief in the system that had shaped our family for generations. Looking at him, I felt a familiar pang of something between pride and regret. He was everything they wanted in a son, everything they thought I had failed to become. I found a seat in the back, behind a group of civilians I didn't recognize. From here, I could see everything without being seen, a skill I had perfected in my current line of work. This ceremony began with the usual pomp, the national anthem followed by speeches about duty, honor, and service. I watched my parents beam with pride as Danny's name was called, watched him step forward to receive his new rank insignia, watched our father's chest swell with satisfaction at seeing his legacy continued. What they couldn't see from their seats was the figure who had just entered through a side door, moving with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. Admiral Patricia Williams was a legend in Navy circles, the first woman to command a carrier strike group and currently the Pentagon's Director of Special Operations. Her presence at a routine promotion ceremony was unusual, to say the least. She took a seat in the front row, her 4-star shoulder boards catching the light. Several officers noticed her arrival and exchanged puzzled glances. Admiral Williams didn't attend lieutenant commander promotion ceremonies. Not unless there was something special about one of the promotees, or unless she had business that went beyond ceremonial duties. As Danny completed his oath and received his new insignia, I noticed Admiral Williams scanning the crowd. Her gaze moved systematically across the gathered families and personnel, the methodical sweep of someone conducting reconnaissance. When her eyes found mine in the back of the hall, they stopped. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other across the crowded room. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. The ceremony concluded with applause and the traditional reception line. Families surged forward to congratulate the newly promoted officers while I remained in my seat, watching the celebration unfold. This was Danny's moment, and despite everything that had happened between our family and me, I genuinely wanted him to enjoy it. What I didn't expect was what happened next. As the crowd began to disperse, Admiral Williams rose from her seat and began walking directly toward the back of the hall. Directly toward me. Every conversation in the immediate vicinity seemed to pause as the 4-star admiral moved through the crowd with purposeful determination. Officers stepped aside automatically, their training kicking in when faced with such senior leadership. My parents, still basking in Danny's moment of triumph, remained oblivious to the drama unfolding behind them. They were surrounded by well-wishers and fellow officers, offering congratulations, completely absorbed in their son's achievement. Admiral Williams stopped 3 feet from where I sat, her uniform immaculate, her expression unreadable. The conversations around us had died completely now, replaced by the kind of electric silence that occurs when something unprecedented is about to happen. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their chatter fading to whispers. "Agent Martinez," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet section of the hall. The title she used hit the room like a physical force. Not Ms. Martinez. Not the dismissive former Lieutenant Martinez that had followed me for 7 years. Agent Martinez. A title that suggested active duty, current service, ongoing, importance. I stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. Years of covert operations had taught me the value of composure under scrutiny, but this was different. This wasn't some foreign intelligence operative or corrupt defense contractor trying to read my intentions. This was a public moment, witnessed by dozens of people, including my family, and every second was being absorbed and analyzed by minds trained to notice details. "Admiral Williams," I replied, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. I kept my voice level, professional, giving away nothing about the relationship between us, or the work we had done together in spaces that didn't appear on organizational charts. "I trust your current assignment is proceeding well," she continued, each word carefully chosen. To the casual observer, it might have sounded like polite conversation between a senior officer and a civilian contractor. But everyone in that room knew that 4-star admirals didn't make small talk with random ceremony attendees. They were witnessing something significant, even if they couldn't yet grasp what it meant. "Exceptionally well, ma'am." "The objectives have been exceeded," I responded, playing my part in what was essentially a coded conversation happening in plain sight. We were discussing operations that officially didn't exist, successes that would never be publicized, threats neutralized before they could materialize into headlines. The ripple effect of our exchange was immediate and spreading. Officers throughout the hall had begun to notice the unusual interaction. I could see Captain Martinez, my father, turning slowly in his chair, his face transitioning from curiosity to confusion to something approaching alarm as he recognized my voice. My mother's hand went to her throat, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. Danny, still surrounded by congratulations near the front of the hall, remained unaware of the seismic shift occurring behind him. He was shaking hands with his commanding officer, accepting praise for his performance and dedication, completely absorbed in his moment of professional triumph. Part of me hoped he could stay in that bubble of success a little longer, before the reality of my presence complicated his perfect day. Your insights on the Seoul situation were particularly valuable, Admiral Williams continued, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the expanding circle of listeners. She was deliberately creating a public record now, establishing my credibility in front of witnesses who would remember this conversation long after the ceremony ended. The Department of Defense is grateful for your service. Seoul. The word hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Several officers exchanged glances, recognition dawning on their faces. There had been whispers throughout the Pacific Fleet about a crisis averted in South Korea 6 months ago, something involving compromised communication systems and a potential intelligence breach that could have destabilized the entire region. The official reports had been classified, but rumors persisted about an unnamed specialist who had identified and neutralized the threat. I maintained my composure, but internally I was calculating the impact of Admiral Williams' revelation. She wasn't just acknowledging my existence or my current status. She was systematically dismantling the narrative that had defined me for 7 years, replacing the story of Jessica Martinez the failure with evidence of Jessica Martinez the asset. The mission requirements were unique, I replied carefully. I was honored to contribute to the solution. By now, Captain Martinez had fully turned in his seat, his dress uniform creaking slightly as he shifted to get a better view of the impossible scene unfolding behind him. His face had gone through several color changes, from the flush of pride at Danny's promotion to the pale confusion of seeing his disgraced daughter speaking as an equal with one of the Navy's most senior leaders. Elena Martinez sat frozen beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could see her mind working, trying to reconcile the daughter she thought he. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. New with the woman being publicly acknowledged by a 4-star admiral. 7 years of carefully maintained family mythology was crumbling in real time, and she was witnessing every moment of its collapse. The Secretary of the Navy has specifically requested your presence at next week's briefing, Admiral Williams said, delivering what could only be described as a precision strike against the official story of my disgrace. The Secretary of the Navy didn't request briefings from psychological casualties or former officers discharged for performance issues. Such requests went to people with current security clearances, active roles, and specialized expertise. Around us, the crowd had grown larger as word spread through the hall that something extraordinary was happening. Cell phones appeared discreetly, though military protocol prevented anyone from actually recording the interaction. Still, the story would spread through base communications faster than any social media platform could carry it. I could see Danny's commanding officer whispering something urgent in his ear, pointing in our direction. Danny's head turned sharply, his eyes finding mine across the crowded hall. The expression on his face was a complex mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. He was beginning to understand that the sister he thought he knew, the family embarrassment who had cracked under pressure, might not exist at all. I'll be available at your convenience, Admiral, I confirmed, knowing that every word of this conversation would be analyzed and reanalyzed by everyone present. We were creating a moment that would become legend, a story that would be told and retold throughout the Pacific Fleet and beyond. Admiral Williams smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her austere features. Outstanding. Your country needs officers with your particular talents, Agent Martinez. I trust we'll be working together for many years to come. Officers. She had said officers. not contractors or consultants or any of the dozen euphemisms used to describe civilian specialists. The implication was clear and devastating to anyone who had believed the official story of my departure from the Navy. Officers served in uniform. Officers held commissions. Officers had ranks and responsibilities and futures within the military structure. The moment stretched like a held breath, everyone in the immediate area frozen in place as they absorbed the implications of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a conversation between a senior admiral and a mysterious civilian. This was the public rehabilitation of someone they had all written off, the dramatic resurrection of a career they thought had ended in disgrace. Then Admiral Williams did something that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. She extended her hand for a handshake, a gesture of professional respect between equals. But as I reached out to accept it, she shifted slightly, her posture straightening into something more formal, something that looked remarkably like the beginning of a salute. The recognition hit the room like an electrical surge. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Children, sensing the adult tension, fell silent. Even the background noise of base operations seemed to fade as everyone focused on the impossible scene playing out before them. Captain Robert Martinez rose slowly from his seat, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. For 7 years, he had lived with the comfortable certainty that his daughter had failed, that she had proven unworthy of the Martinez name and military tradition. Now, watching a 4-star admiral treat her with obvious respect and deference, that certainty was evaporating like morning mist. The handshake concluded, but Admiral Williams wasn't finished. She stepped back slightly, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent hall. "The President's commendation was well-deserved," she said, delivering the final blow to the narrative that had defined my family's understanding of who I was and what I had become. Not many officers receive personal recognition from the Commander-in-Chief for classified operations. Your father should be very proud. The silence that followed was absolute. Admiral Williams turned and walked away with the same measured precision she had used to approach, leaving me standing alone in a circle of stunned faces and unspoken questions. The weight of her words hung in the air like smoke from a fired cannon, impossible to ignore and equally impossible to take back. Presidential commendation, classified operations, personal recognition from the Commander-in-Chief. Each phrase was a nail in the coffin of the story my family had believed for 7 years. I remained standing for a moment longer, allowing the full impact of the Admiral's revelation to settle over the crowd. Then, with the same calm composure I had maintained throughout the exchange, I gathered my small purse and began walking toward the exit. Not hurried, not dramatic, just a professional departure from a professional encounter. But the hall around me had transformed into something resembling a disturbed ant colony. Whispered conversations erupted in every direction as officers and families tried to process what they had just witnessed. I could hear fragments of urgent discussions, voices trying to make sense of the impossible contradiction between the disgraced daughter they thought they knew and the decorated agent who had just been publicly acknowledged by one of the Navy's most senior leaders. Did she say presidential commendation? I heard Seoul situation. Wasn't that the classified incident last year? Agent Martinez, not former Lieutenant Martinez. 4-star admirals don't make social calls to promote ceremonies. My father stood frozen beside his chair, his face cycling through expressions I had never seen before. The confident certainty that had defined Captain Robert Martinez throughout his career was cracking like ice under spring sun. Everything he thought he knew about his daughter's military service, everything he had told himself about her failure and disgrace, was being systematically dismantled by evidence he couldn't ignore or explain away. Elena Martinez had gone completely pale, one hand pressed against her chest as if trying to slow her racing heart. I could see her mind working frantically, trying to reconcile 7 years of family narrative with the reality unfolding before her eyes. She had spent so many holidays changing the subject when relatives asked about me, so many dinner conversations avoiding my name entirely, so many nights wondering where her daughter had gone and what she had become. Danny's promotion ceremony had effectively ended the moment Admiral Williams spoke my name. The receiving line had dissolved into clusters of people discussing the extraordinary scene they had just witnessed. New Lieutenant Commander Daniel Martinez stood abandoned near the ceremonial podium, his moment of triumph completely overshadowed by his sister's unexpected resurrection. I reached the exit and paused, turning back for one final look at the family I hadn't seen in 7 years. They remained frozen in their seats, 3 people struggling to understand that the person they had written off as a failure might actually be the most successful member of the Martinez family. Danny had finally broken free from his well-wishers and was staring directly at me, his face a mixture of confusion, hurt, and something that might have been admiration. The late afternoon sun hit my face as I stepped outside the ceremonial hall, and for the first time in years, I felt something approaching peace. Not because of the recognition or the public validation, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. I hadn't sought this moment or planned this confrontation, but Admiral Williams had given me something I hadn't realized I needed: the public restoration of my professional reputation. My phone buzzed as I walked toward the parking lot. A text message from an encrypted number I recognized. Package delivered. Car waiting at Gate 3. Time to go home. PW Admiral Patricia Williams had orchestrated more than just a public acknowledgement. She had created an exit strategy, a way for me to leave Pearl Harbor before the inevitable family confrontation that would follow her revelations. There would be time for those conversations later, when emotions had cooled and everyone had processed the fundamental shift in family dynamics. The black sedan waiting at Gate 3 was unremarkable, the kind of government vehicle that could blend into traffic anywhere in the world. The driver, a Navy lieutenant I didn't recognize, simply nodded as I approached and opened the rear door. No questions, no small talk, just professional efficiency that spoke to careful advance planning. As we drove away from Naval Station Pearl Harbor, I allowed myself to think about the phone calls that would come tonight. Danny would call first, his military training overriding family drama as he sought to understand the operational realities behind Admiral Williams' revelations. He would want facts, timelines, explanations that made sense within the framework of military service. Elena would call next, her mother's heart desperate to understand where her daughter had been and why she had remained silent for so long. The conversation would be emotional, painful, full of tears and recriminations, and desperate attempts to rebuild a relationship that had been severed by institutional necessity. Robert Martinez would not call. He would retreat into his study, pour himself a scotch, and spend the evening reviewing everything he thought he knew about my departure from the Navy 7 years ago. He would read and reread the official reports, looking for clues he had missed, evidence that might explain how his disgraced daughter had become someone important enough to earn recognition from 4-star admirals and presidents. The sedan merged onto the highway, carrying me away from Pearl Harbor and back toward the classified world where I actually lived and worked. In 6 hours, I would be on a military transport to Washington, preparing for briefings that would determine the next phase of operations that officially didn't exist. But for now, I had a few hours to process the emotional earthquake that Admiral Williams had triggered with her careful words. My secure phone rang as we approached Honolulu International Airport. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers, but I recognized the pattern immediately. Martinez. Outstanding performance today, came the familiar voice of Admiral Williams. The ripple effects are already beginning. We've had 17 calls in the last hour from Pacific Fleet commanders asking about your current status and availability for consultation. I smiled despite myself. I wasn't expecting such a public declaration. The Seoul operation changed the calculation, she replied. Your work prevented a regional crisis that could have destabilized 3 allied governments. The president's recognition wasn't ceremonial, it was strategic. People need to understand that you're an active asset, not a historical footnote. Through the sedan's tinted windows, I watched Hawaiian traffic flow around us, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware of the classified operations that kept their world stable and secure. My family had been part of that protected ignorance, allowed to believe comfortable lies because the truth would have compromised ongoing missions. The timing was perfect, Admiral Williams continued. Your brother's ceremony provided ideal cover for a soft revelation. By tomorrow morning, every officer in the Pacific Fleet will know that Jessica Martinez is back, active and operating at the highest levels of naval intelligence. And my family will adjust to the new reality. Military families are resilient, Agent Martinez. They understand that service sometimes requires sacrifices that can't be explained or acknowledged publicly. Your father will come to terms with the fact that his daughter's apparent failure was actually a cover story protecting classified operations. The sedan pulled into a restricted area of the airport, approaching a hangar marked only with numbers and security warnings. Inside, I could see the familiar outline of a military transport aircraft, engines already warming for departure. My brief return to family drama was ending, replaced by the urgent realities of national security work. The next phase begins tomorrow, Admiral Williams said. The Pentagon briefing will formalize your new role and expand your operational authority. You'll be working directly with the Joint Chiefs on threat assessment and response protocols. I ended the call and gathered my things as the sedan stopped beside the aircraft. The driver remained silent as I stepped out, his discretion another reminder of the professional world I inhabited. As I climbed the steps to the transport, I took one last look at the Hawaiian sunset, thinking about the family I had left behind to process the truth about who their daughter and sister had really become. The aircraft lifted off into the Pacific twilight, carrying me back toward the classified corridors where my real life continued. Behind me, in a ceremonial hall at Pearl Harbor, 3 people named Martinez were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about failure, success, and family honor had been turned completely upside down in the space of a single conversation. Danny's promotion to lieutenant commander would be remembered, but not for his achievement. It would be the day that Jessica Martinez returned from the dead, publicly acknowledged by the highest levels of naval leadership as someone whose service mattered more than anyone had ever imagined. The family that had banned me from attending would spend years coming to terms with the reality that their greatest disappointment had actually been their greatest success. The call came at 0347 hours, 3 days after Pearl Harbor. I was in my apartment in Arlington, Virginia, reviewing classified briefing materials for the upcoming Pentagon meetings, when my secure phone displayed Danny's contact information. Military personnel don't call their siblings at 0:30 unless something critical has happened, and I knew this conversation had been building since Admiral Williams walked away from that ceremonial hall. Jess. His voice was strained, carrying the weight of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. Danny. Congratulations on the promotion. Cut the shit. The profanity was uncharacteristic for my by-the-book brother, an indication of how thoroughly Admiral Williams' revelation had shaken his worldview. I need to know what happened. The real story. Not whatever bullshit cover story you've been living for the last 7 years. I set down the classified documents I had been reviewing. Reports on emerging threats in the South China Sea that would shape tomorrow's briefing with the Joint Chiefs. The irony wasn't lost on me that my brother was demanding truth while I sat surrounded by secrets that could never be shared, even with family. Some things can't be explained over the phone, I replied carefully. Then explain what you can. His voice carried the sharp edge of command authority, the tone of an officer accustomed to getting direct answers to direct questions. Admiral Williams doesn't show up to lieutenant commander promotions. 4-star admirals don't make small talk about presidential commendations. And they sure as hell don't publicly acknowledge people who cracked under pressure 7 years ago. Through my apartment window, I could see the early morning darkness over Washington, the city where decisions were made that shaped global security. Somewhere in those government buildings, files existed that contained the complete truth about my career, my operations, my real contributions to national defense. But those files were classified at levels that made sharing impossible, even with family members who held security clearances. What did Dad tell you about why I left? I asked, deflecting his questions with questions of my own. That you couldn't handle the pressure of command, that you made poor decisions during a training exercise that compromised team safety, that you were offered the choice between court-martial and voluntary separation, and you chose to leave quietly. Danny's recitation was precise, clinical, the official narrative that had been carefully constructed to explain my disappearance from military service. And you believed that? Why wouldn't I? Dad had the official reports, the incident documentation. Your commanding officers confirmed the story. His voice carried a note of defensiveness, the the reaction of someone whose fundamental assumptions were being challenged. What was I supposed to think when my sister vanished overnight and never contacted the family again? I moved to the kitchen, needing something to do with my hands, while navigating this minefield of family trauma and operational security. The coffee maker gurgled to life, providing mundane domestic sounds that contrasted sharply with the classified nature of our conversation. "The story you heard was designed to protect ongoing operations," I said finally. "Sometimes the truth has to be buried to keep people safe." "What operations? What truth?" Danny's frustration was building, each unanswered question adding to his growing anger. "I watched Admiral Williams treat you like some kind of national hero. Presidential commendations don't get handed out for psychological breakdowns." The secure line beeped softly, indicating that encryption protocols were functioning properly. Everything we said was being scrambled and re-scrambled, making interception virtually impossible. But operational security wasn't just about preventing eavesdropping. It was about controlling information flow to protect ongoing missions and the people involved in them. 7 years ago, I discovered something during that training exercise. I began, choosing my words with surgical precision. Something that threatened national security. When I reported it through proper channels, certain people decided the threat was less important than maintaining institutional credibility. What kind of threat? The kind that could have gotten a lot of people killed if it hadn't been addressed. I poured coffee into a mug emblazoned with the Navy anchor insignia, a gift from my academy graduation that had survived everything that followed. The kind that required someone to disappear from official records while continuing to work the problem from the shadows. Danny was quiet for several seconds, processing implications that would reshape everything he thought he knew about military service, family loyalty, and the cost of protecting national interests. His generation of officers had grown up believing in transparent command structures and institutional accountability, concepts that became complicated when dealing with threats that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. "You're telling me that your discharge was fake? That you've been working undercover for 7 years while we thought you were a failure?" His voice carried a mixture of incredulity and growing anger. "You let us believe you cracked under pressure while you were actually saving the country? I let you believe what you needed to believe to stay safe." The coffee was bitter, over-extracted, matching my mood as I navigated the emotional minefield of family reconciliation while maintaining operational security. Some missions require personal sacrifice. Sometimes that sacrifice includes letting the people you love think the worst of you. The line went quiet again, filled only with the electronic hiss of encrypted communication. I could hear Danny breathing, processing, trying to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the classified operator Admiral Williams had publicly acknowledged. Military training taught officers to compartmentalize, to separate personal emotions from professional realities. But family relationships didn't follow military protocols. "Jesus Christ, Jess!" His voice had changed, anger giving way to something that sounded like grief. "Do you have any idea what this has done to Mom? She cries every Christmas because her daughter disappeared. She changes the subject every time someone asks about you because she doesn't know how to explain what happened." That hit harder than I expected. Elena Martinez had always been the emotional center of our family, the one who held everything together while Dad pursued his military career. I had imagined her disappointment, her confusion, her sense of failure as a mother. But I hadn't fully considered the ongoing pain of not knowing, the daily burden of carrying unanswered questions about a daughter who had simply vanished from their lives. "And Dad?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "Dad throws himself into work. He volunteers for every deployment, every special assignment, every opportunity to be anywhere except home, dealing with the reality that his daughter's military career ended in disgrace." Danny's words were sharp, precise cuts designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. "He tells people you're working in the private sector now, some vague bullshit about consulting work that nobody believes." Through the apartment window, the Washington skyline was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. In 3 hours, I would be in the Pentagon, briefing senior military leadership on threats that could destabilize entire regions. The disconnect between my professional significance and my family's perception of my failure was becoming almost unbearable. "I never wanted this," I said quietly. "I never wanted you to think I failed." But the alternative was worse. What alternative? What could possibly be worse than letting your family believe you're a disgrace? Having your family become targets because they knew too much about classified operations. The words came out harder than I intended, carrying 7 years of suppressed frustration and enforced isolation. You want the truth, Danny? The truth is that people have died to protect the work I do. The truth is that our enemies would love nothing more than to use my family against me. The truth is that your safety was more important than your opinion of me. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of revelation and its implications. Danny was beginning to understand that his sister's disgrace had been carefully constructed theater, designed to protect not just ongoing operations, but the Martinez family itself. The emotional cost had been enormous, but the alternative could have been catastrophic. "How long?" he asked finally. "How long do you have to keep living this lie?" "It's not a lie anymore." I finished my coffee and moved back toward the classified documents waiting on my desk. Admiral Williams' public acknowledgement changed the operational parameters. The cover story is being officially retired, which means the family can finally know the truth. "Not all of it," Danny said, demonstrating the tactical intelligence that had earned his promotion to lieutenant commander. "You still can't tell us what you actually do, can you?" "No. But you can know that I do something important. That I never failed, never cracked, never disgraced the family name." I picked up a briefing folder marked with classification levels that would make Danny's security clearance look like a library card. "And maybe that's enough for now. It has to be enough for Mom and Dad, too." His voice had softened, the anger replaced by understanding and something that might have been pride. "They need to know their daughter didn't fail. They need to know they can stop being ashamed." Outside my window, Washington was waking up to another day of defending democracy, through methods that couldn't be acknowledged or celebrated publicly. My family was waking up to the realization that their greatest shame had actually been their greatest pride, hidden behind classification levels and operational necessities they could never fully understand. The conversation with Danny marked the beginning of the end of my 7-year exile from the Martinez family, but it also marked the beginning of a new phase in my career that would soon take me places none of us could have imagined. The Pentagon briefing room was smaller than most people expect, just 12 chairs around a polished mahogany table with secure communication equipment built into the walls. When I entered at 08:00 hours sharp, 5 of the Joint Chiefs were already seated, along with Admiral Williams and 3 civilian officials, whose presence indicated the highest levels of government involvement. The atmosphere was businesslike, professional, but charged with the kind of energy that accompanies decisions of enormous consequence. "Agent Martinez." Admiral Williams nodded as I took my designated seat. "Thank you for joining us." The pleasantries were brief. Within minutes, we were deep into classified briefings about emerging threats in the South China Sea, terrorist financing networks in Southeast Asia, and cyber warfare capabilities that posed existential risks to American interests worldwide. My role in these discussions wasn't ceremonial. I was providing intelligence assessments and operational recommendations that would shape military policy for years to come. General Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward during my briefing on maritime security threats. "Agent Martinez, your analysis suggests a coordinated campaign to compromise our naval communications systems. What's your confidence level on this assessment?" 93%, sir. The pattern's signatures match previous operations we've attributed to state-sponsored actors. The sole incident was preliminary reconnaissance for a much larger operation. I clicked through satellite imagery and intercepted communications that painted a picture of systematic intelligence gathering by hostile forces. They're mapping our response protocols, identifying vulnerability windows, preparing for coordinated strikes against multiple targets simultaneously. The room was silent as the implications sank in. What I was describing wasn't just another security threat. It was preparation for warfare conducted through information systems. Attacks that could cripple naval operations without firing a single conventional weapon. Admiral Chen, Chief of Naval Operations, studied the data projections I had prepared. Timeline for deployment of countermeasures? If we implement the protocols I've developed, we can begin hardening our systems within 60 days. Full deployment across the Pacific Fleet within 6 months. I had spent 3 years developing these countermeasures, working with programmers and engineers whose security clearances were so high they couldn't discuss their work with their own families. But implementation requires approval at the highest levels of government. That was when Secretary of Defense Morrison spoke up from his position at the head of the table. Agent Martinez, your recommendations are being forwarded to the President this afternoon, but there's another matter we need to discuss. The energy in the room shifted, becoming more formal, more ceremonial. Admiral Williams opened a folder that had been sitting beside her throughout the briefing, withdrawing documents that carried official seals and signatures I recognized as belonging to the highest levels of naval command. Jessica Martinez, Secretary Morrison began, reading from prepared remarks. Your service to the United States Navy and the security of our nation has been extraordinary and unprecedented. Your sacrifices, both personal and professional, have contributed to the prevention of multiple national security crises that the American people will never know about. I remained seated, maintaining military bearing despite the civilian clothes I wore. This felt like something significant, something that would change the operational parameters that had governed my life for 7 years. By the authority vested in me by the President of the United States and the Secretary of the Navy, you are hereby reinstated to active duty with the rank of Rear Admiral Upper Half. The words hit me like physical blows, each one reshaping reality in ways I hadn't anticipated. Your date of rank is retroactive to your original separation from service, acknowledging that your departure was operational necessity rather than disciplinary action. Admiral. The rank that had been mentioned in passing during family conversations, usually in reference to distant goals that officers hope to achieve late in their careers. The rank that represented the absolute pinnacle of naval service, reserved for officers who had demonstrated exceptional leadership under the most challenging circumstances. Furthermore, Secretary Morrison continued, you are appointed as the Navy's youngest admiral in active service, and you will assume command of the newly established Pacific Maritime Intelligence Division, reporting directly to the Chief of Naval Operations and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The room erupted in congratulations, handshakes, and expressions of support from officers who had watched my career from the shadows for 7 years. But underneath the celebration, I was processing the magnitude of what had just happened. I wasn't just being recognized for past service, I was being given operational command over programs that would shape naval intelligence for decades to come. Admiral Williams approached with a small velvet box containing the insignia of my new rank. Your family should be very proud, Admiral Martinez. Family. The word carried new weight now, knowing that Danny, Elena, and Robert Martinez would learn about this promotion through official channels, understanding finally and completely that their daughter and sister had never failed at anything. The woman they had written off as a disappointment was now the youngest admiral in the United States Navy. 2 hours later, I was in my new office in the Pentagon, a corner suite with windows overlooking the Potomac River and walls lined with secure communication equipment that connected me to naval intelligence operations worldwide. My assistant, a Navy lieutenant commander with a Harvard MBA and a top-secret clearance, was already fielding calls from fleet commanders requesting briefings on Pacific maritime threats. The secure phone rang at 1,347 hours. The caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately. Admiral Martinez speaking. Admiral Martinez. The voice belonged to Captain Robert Martinez, my father, and for the first time in 7 years he was using my correct rank. I believe congratulations are in order. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had. Professional respect replaced parental disappointment. Military courtesy filled the spaces where family warmth should have been. We talked about operational responsibilities, command structures, and the challenges of Pacific maritime security. What we didn't talk about was 7 years of silence, betrayal, and mutual incomprehension. Your mother would like to speak with you, he said finally. Elena Martinez's voice was shaky, emotional, carrying 7 years of suppressed maternal pride and regret. Jessica, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't understand. I'm so sorry we let you disappear from our lives. Mom, you did what you thought was right based on the information you had. I was looking out my Pentagon window at the Washington skyline, thinking about all the classified operations that had shaped my career while my family believed I was a failure. The important thing is that now you know the truth. The youngest admiral in the Navy. Her voice was filled with wonder and disbelief. My daughter is the youngest admiral in the United States Navy. The pride in her words was overwhelming. Years of accumulated shame and disappointment being replaced by understanding of what I had actually accomplished. She had spent 7 years making excuses for a daughter she thought had failed. Now she was discovering that same daughter had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Danny called that evening, his voice carrying a mixture of professional respect and familial affection that had been missing for too long. "Admiral Martinez, sir," he said with exaggerated formality before breaking into laughter. "Jesus, Jess, you outrank everyone in the family now. Technically, I outrank almost everyone in the Navy now. How does it feel?" I considered the question while reviewing intelligence reports that would determine tomorrow's operational briefings. How did it feel to finally have public recognition for work that had consumed my life for 7 years? How did it feel to know that my family could finally be proud instead of ashamed? How did it feel to command resources that could prevent conflicts before they started? "It feels like responsibility," I answered finally. "Like the real work is just beginning." 3 months after my promotion, the Martinez family gathered for Danny's wedding in San Diego. It was the first time we had all been in the same room since my promotion ceremony, which had been conducted in a classified facility with no family members present. Elena had insisted on a family dinner the night before the wedding, determined to rebuild relationships that had been fractured by 7 years of enforced separation. We met at a restaurant overlooking Coronado Beach, the same stretch of sand where Danny and I had played as children when Dad was stationed at Naval Base San Diego. The conversation was careful at first, all of us navigating the emotional minefield of family dynamics that had been fundamentally altered by the revelation of my true career. "So what exactly do you do now?" Danny asked over dinner, his new wife Sarah listening intently to our family drama. "I run intelligence operations that keep the Pacific Fleet ahead of emerging threats," I replied carefully. "I can't discuss specifics, but the work involves everything from cyber warfare to maritime security to preventing conflicts before they develop into shooting wars." Robert Martinez nodded approvingly, finally understanding that his daughter's career had followed a trajectory that exceeded even his own distinguished service record. "The youngest admiral in naval history," he said with obvious pride. "I always knew you had the intelligence and determination for command. I just didn't understand the circumstances of your career path." Elena reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm just grateful to have my daughter back. I spent 7 years wondering if you were safe, if you were happy, if you ever thought about coming home." "I thought about it every day," I admitted, "but the work required complete commitment. There were operations that couldn't be compromised by personal relationships or family connections. People died to protect some of the intelligence I was developing." The weight of that statement settled over the table, reminding everyone that my career had involved life and death decisions that went far beyond normal military service. Sarah, Danny's new wife, looked slightly overwhelmed by the realization that she was marrying into a family where dinner conversation included classified operations and national security threats. "Will things be different now?" Elena asked. "Can you be part of the family again?" "My new position allows for more normal family relationships," I explained. "The Pacific Maritime Intelligence Division operates through official channels, which means I can acknowledge my role and maintain family connections without compromising operational security." We talked until nearly midnight, 7 years of accumulated questions and explanations flowing between us like water through a broken dam. Danny wanted to understand the technical aspects of my work. Elena needed emotional reassurance that I was safe and would remain in contact. Robert sought professional details about command structure and operational responsibilities. By the end of the evening, we had established a new equilibrium, a family dynamic that acknowledged both my classified responsibilities and our emotional connections. It wasn't the same as before. Too much had happened. Too many years had passed. Too many assumptions had been shattered and rebuilt. But it was functional, honest, and sustainable. The wedding ceremony the next day was everything a military wedding should be: precise, emotional, and deeply meaningful. Danny looked magnificent in his dress whites, Sarah radiant in her wedding gown, both of them surrounded by family and friends who understood the unique challenges of military marriage. During the reception, Admiral Williams appeared unexpectedly, having flown in from Washington specifically to attend. Her presence drew attention from every military guest, but she made a point of seeking out Robert and Elena Martinez to introduce herself properly. "Your daughter is one of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege of working with," she told them. "The Navy is fortunate to have someone of her caliber in a position of such responsibility." Elena Martinez beamed with pride, finally able to share her daughter's achievements instead of making excuses for perceived failures. Robert stood a little straighter, understanding that his family's military legacy was being continued by someone whose service exceeded even his own accomplishments. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Danny pulled me aside for a private conversation on the hotel terrace overlooking San Diego Bay. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For 7 years, I believed the worst about you. I let myself think that my sister couldn't handle military pressure, that she had disgraced the family name." "You believed what you were told by people you trusted," I replied. "That's not your fault, but I should have questioned it. I should have known that Jessica Martinez doesn't quit, doesn't crack under pressure, doesn't walk away from responsibility." He was staring out at the harbor, where naval vessels moved through the darkness like ghosts. "I should have known my sister better than that." The cover story was designed to be believable. It had to be convincing enough to fool everyone, including family members who knew me well. Still, Danny shook his head, I should have had more faith. We stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the lights of the naval base reflect on the water. 2 Martinez siblings, both naval officers, both carrying forward a family tradition of military service, but in ways that previous generations could never have imagined. "What happens next?" Danny asked. "I built the Pacific Maritime Intelligence Division into something that can prevent the next Pearl Harbor, the next 9/11, the next major intelligence failure that costs American lives." I thought about the briefing materials waiting in my Pentagon office, the emerging threats that required immediate attention, the classified operations that would shape global security for years to come. I make sure that American naval forces have every possible advantage in an increasingly dangerous world. And personally, I rebuild relationships with a family that I love but had to leave behind for 7 years. I figure out how to be Admiral Martinez and Jessica Martinez at the same time. I smiled at my brother, this newly married lieutenant commander who was still processing the reality of having an admiral for a sister. I learned how to live a life that includes both classified responsibilities and normal family connections. The next morning, I flew back to Washington on a military transport, returning to the Pentagon office, where classified briefings and operational planning sessions awaited. But for the first time in 7 years, I was carrying something more than just professional responsibilities. I was carrying the restored love and pride of a family that finally understood what their daughter and sister had accomplished in service to her country. My secure phone buzzed as the aircraft lifted off from San Diego, carrying an encrypted message from the President's National Security Advisor. There was a developing situation in the South China Sea that required immediate attention, threats that could escalate into regional conflict if not handled properly. Within hours, I would be briefing the highest levels of government on response options that could shape American foreign policy for decades. But first, I sent a simple text message to Elena Martinez. "Love you, Mom, talk soon." The response came back immediately. "Love you too, Admiral, so proud of you." 7 years of silence had finally ended. The youngest admiral in United States Navy history was going home to a family that could finally celebrate her success, instead of mourning her failure. And somewhere in the classified depths of the Pentagon, the real work of protecting American interests in a dangerous world continued with renewed purpose and unprecedented family support. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.